All right, good morning, everyone. It's Monday morning, but the birds are singing and the grass is green, so I'm happy to see you here today, and we will be working on the report that you've all had an opportunity to provide input for, but we'll start off with our introductory exercise, and the question for today is, what have been your strategies for staying grounded when times get challenging? And I'll go first, and then we'll go in alphabetical order. So it's been pretty rocky lately, and I've been angry, fearful for myself and for others, sometimes hopeless, sometimes lost. But what has helped me has been prayer and mindfulness of my surroundings and where my energy is being focused, and also reconnecting with the land. It's spring, and for me that means hope, and it's a literal grounding for me. By walking outside and working outside and just being able to look out the window and see blue sky. Okay, Jason.
Good morning, everyone. Good to be with you. It's certainly been a difficult time, but I've had the blessing of being able to attend Mass on a almost daily basis for a long time now, and that's just really grounding to just stop in the middle of your day and center yourself in prayer. Spending time with my wife and family, obviously just a great blessing. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is just more family time. And then just trying to stay connected to people who are struggling. I've been really fortunate and blessed during the last year. No sicknesses, illnesses in my family or anything. But there are a lot of people around me struggling, and just trying to stay connected to them and let them know that they're in our thoughts, and trying to reach out and help them in whatever way we can.
Dr. Bean.
Good morning, everyone. Trying to turn my camera on, but it's not working. There we go. I think when I think about what's been sort of centering me lately, prayer, as well as trying to be present with my children, trying to be there for them, trying to listen to them. So working on listening and being in the present. Also walking. I have a bull terrier puppy who, she's 1.5 years now, but she's still wild. And my children and I like to take her on hikes and walks, and we've taught her all her commands in Dakota. So together we like to teach her tricks and sort of focus on our little family and our animal family. Yeah.
Auditor Blaha.
You're going to have to pardon me a little bit today. My voice is not great. And it's also part of the reason I am not exactly camera ready. So what I do when I'm feeling pretty awful is I try to take the kind of the artifacts of the awful and try to make something nice out of them. So it's my unusual crafting. Right now, my house is full of all kinds of medical devices because my husband's cancer. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm making fabulous baskets and things out of medical tubing. So it's something kind of wonderful about being able to take awful things and make them beautiful. So right now, if you would like a lovely basket, just let me know, because my husband suggests that these would be good to give away to other people who don't live in our home. But I think that there is some joy. There's some joy. There's beauty in everything, and sometimes you just got to dig a little deep to find it. Thank you.
Oh. Lindsay Dyer.
Hi, Auditor Blaha. I hope you feel better. I'm sorry you're not well. So what came to mind when I saw this question was I try and physically make myself feel grounded by just being very mindful of what I eat, what I drink. So over this past year, I gave up alcohol in October, which has been really nice, and I've loved it. Waking up every morning with a fresh start, and then also gone gluten-free. And so I just feel like just being mindful physically helps me to know that, pandemic or no pandemic, I'm doing what I can to keep myself as healthy as possible.
It's good to hear. Lieutenant Governor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for just creating this space and getting us started in a thoughtful way, Chair Westerman. I'll be really candid. It has been hard. This has been a real struggle to figure out how to stay grounded and connected. I think it is remembering, even in isolation, that there are tools and medicines that we have been given to stay connected to each other. Additionally, just very trying to spend a lot of time with my my family. Yesterday was with my mom for the first time indoors without Max, and we hugged a lot and all sat on the couch together, and it was that was really really powerful and meaningful. And so I appreciated that opportunity, but it is always a challenge. So remembering those tools and those gifts that we've been given to try to start the day off in a good way and be mindful, because the pain of this, especially the last few weeks, has been tremendous. But I am hopeful as well with this spring and the time of renewal. So thank you.
Miigwech. Jessica.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair, for bringing us into this space and for acknowledging that the last, I don't know how long, but especially the last few weeks have been really hard. I've also struggled a bit trying to remember what works and what doesn't. But what we accidentally on purpose stumbled on is that right now I'm with my parents on a trip, and we actually got to go together and stay in a house together and play silly board games together. And what really grounded me was when my daughter and my parents got to laugh together, and that was a wonderful thing.
Laughter does wonders, especially with people you love. Jennifer.
So for the past year, I've been very conscious of knowing that there's a point to turn off all screens, and so the two things I think that have grounded me the most are a couple things that people have already said, but being outside, even when it's very, very cold, but certainly now when it's so beautiful and nice, and just being present in the world, and not feeling like I'm always operating through a screen has been so important. And then also it's been very important for me to in terms of that disconnecting from news or from work or from meetings, to engage in creative pursuits. So I go into my sewing room for long periods of time and really focus and stay there, and that's helped a lot.
Extended creativity is really a release, a good release, whatever that creative form might be. And Representative Lee. Nope. And Daniel Yang.
Thank you, Chair. Over the last year, I've instituted a daily walk procedure, so several miles walks, whether it's 30 degrees out or 300 degrees out, and whether it is 6 a.m. or 10 p.m., which oftentimes the walks have to occur outside of those office hours, just because of what the office is called on, but has helped with what a lot of other folks have said, getting away from screens and getting out and moving your body. And so for me, it's been walks.
Good. Did I miss anyone? Checking my list here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you all for being here and for working through this draft of our report in these busy and challenging times. I appreciate your willingness to share how you make it through in these difficult times, because I think that also helps inspire those of us who share your thoughts and hear your words to feel grounded as well. So we'll get to the task at hand. At our last meeting, we discussed the second draft of the policy for commemorative artwork on the Capitol grounds and the application forms and the frequently asked questions document. And we talked a little bit about preservation, historic preservation, and the differences between that and historic understanding. And we sent out a survey to get your feedback and discussion to incorporate changes into the document. And that's what we're going to do this morning. The staff and the editing subgroup and I work together to incorporate your suggested changes to the document. And so our goal today is to review the final draft of the policy for commemorative artwork on the Capitol grounds, and then determine if there are any further changes that need to be made before we include it in the decision process task force recommendation to the CAP board. So when I logged in, for some reason, I can't see everybody at the same time. So I'll have to watch carefully at the bottom here. You had the opportunity to review the document and provide your feedback via the survey. I want to thank everybody who participated in the anonymous survey. Some of the key changes that we considered and are including are replacing the term deaccession with removal to stay consistent with our goal to make sure that the language in this policy is understandable by everybody who might be interested in it. We also talked about changing the definition of modification to match the addition, modification, and removal request forms. And then we included some clarity around the request approval and denial processes. So we'll go through the final draft and answer any of the questions for the full group's review and identify any additional edits to the draft. We hope to reach a consensus on the language in the draft policy for the commemorative artwork on the Capitol grounds so that it can be included in our report. So, JC, you want to put up the decision-making document?
Right now.
So just as a reminder,
can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Beautiful. Would you like me to make it bigger? Does that?
No, that should be okay.
Okay.
What I was looking for was the decision-making section of our charter that describes consensus, but that's okay. Just leave it there.
Okay.
So from the beginning, we agreed that we would operate by consensus and would make every effort to create solutions that meet Minnesotans' many perspectives. And so consensus is reached when each of us can say, honestly, 1, I believe that other members of the task force understand my point of view. 2, I believe I understand other members' points of view. And 3, whether I prefer the decision or not, I support it because it was arrived at openly and fairly, and it is the best solution for us at this time. So I just wanted to kind of review that language there. All right, so our topic for discussion and questions. Start with page 8. It might help if you make your screen bigger, JC. Okay, there. There we go. Okay, and the majority opinion was not to define sustained, overwhelming, and documented in the definitions list, and allow the CAP board the discretion over what sustained, overwhelming, and documented means. So is this clear for everyone? So there it is, right in the middle of the page, sustained, overwhelming, and documented public objection. That the CAP board be allowed discretion over defining what sustained, overwhelming, and documented means. And you can see the comments from the survey. So any feedback here or discussion? I don't see any hands up. Oh. Lindsay, there.
I think it's, yeah, I agree, because I think the alternative was to specify what would constitute a sustained, overwhelming, and documented public objection. And I don't think that we can specify exactly what that is or amounts because things change so much, communication changes, and there could be a method for which there's public objection that we can't foresee now. So I like the idea of keeping it open and to the board to decide.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I think that's a good observation, that we can't foresee what other methods there might be. That could influence the amount of documented response to a work. Okay. All right, the next one is the conditions. There was no majority opinion on whether the periodic review should evaluate the commemorative artwork collection on the conditions for consideration of modification or removal, or on the evaluation criteria for commemorative artwork. So do we want to make a recommendation on how the periodic review should be administered, either on the conditions here, There's been sustained, overwhelming, and documented public objection. The work does not meet the guiding principles and/or criteria. The work has serious faults in construction and requires maintenance or extreme maintenance. The site is no longer safe, or significant changes in the use, character, or design of the site require reevaluation. The other option is to look at the evaluation criteria themselves. And this is the long list here. Is it still approachable and accessible? Does it create space for a range of responses in its complexity? Are there social and cultural conditions that have changed? Issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Has the work outlived its lifespan or exceeded its lifespan? Does it contribute to public education, public life, public space? Is it an accurate representation of an event, group, or individual in Minnesota's history? Does it respect contributions and perspectives of the work's creators? Is there an element of restorative justice? And does it reflect our evolving social values? So those are the criteria, the evaluation criteria. So you can see that's a long list. And do we want to make a recommendation to use this bulleted list of conditions for consideration? And we've condensed addition, modification, relocation into a single term, and then removal. So a request for change may not necessarily mean removal, but it could be modification or relocation or further interpretation. So those are our choices, the bulleted list or the longer evaluation list, the evaluation criteria. Yes, Jessica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think before we get into which set of bullets do we use, I'm seeing an initial question of, do we use the bullets at all? That's what I saw based on the comments that were on the draft. The one that said neither suggested to me that maybe there should not be the periodic review. And I just wanted to make sure that we, first of all, that if that's what that means, first of all, I guess gut check that assumption. Is that what that means? And if so, address that before we get to how to apply the criteria, which criteria to apply.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Okay. Other comments, responses that we don't suggest either in terms of determining what the periodic review should involve, or the time frame for a periodic review. Lindsay?
Just so I can understand what that comment was, I'm reading on the side. So if somebody could potentially submit paperwork to have something removed at any point, this might not be necessary. Is that what it's saying? You don't need to review unless there's an objection and somebody has applied to have it removed. Is that what it's saying?
Jason?
I think that was my comment, actually, and my point was much simpler than that, which is to say, if there's you've got 20 monuments or commemorative works, and there's input on 6 of them. The 10-year review doesn't need to address the other 14 and go through all those factors, it seems to me, or unless there's something that someone raises that you don't need to put all the work into it. So I think it was much narrower than I think perhaps it suggested, so I apologize for that. It was just to say we don't need to do what we don't need to do. We don't need to create issues where there aren't necessarily any in the first place.
Okay, so when there are proposals for addition, modification, or addition, modification, relocation, or removal, we only would suggest that those particular works of art be under consideration in that review, that not everything has to be reviewed when requests come up. Jessica.
I understand the point in terms of minimizing work. I'm a little bit concerned that that's not the intent that the larger task force had to start. Just because I can recall several instances of folks talking about doing a periodic review, not to look for issues, because I don't think that either the conditions or the criteria suggest a predetermined outcome, but to ensure that the Capitol Mall monuments continue to reflect the larger values of the whole state. That's how I read it. Understanding, I agree with Jason that it does mean more work for the staff to do it more often and to do it for the full set more often. I tend to think that the way this will work in practice is that the first time we do it, it's going to be a lot, but then each time after that, you sort of look back and revisit and say, is this still what we mean? Does this still meet our values? Has this person we've now figured out done something horrific and we want to change it, or not? Or is it we found even more great things that this person has done, and so we definitely want to keep it? But I think building in the timeline for all of the monuments, the point is not to look for issues so much as to ensure that there is a touch point where folks are doing the work to make sure that this still aligns with our values.
Okay. So, Jason, you have your hand up.
Jason, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My only point was that if we're gathering public input at the front end of that process, that the input that's gathered from the public should then guide the periodic review, rather than, the CAP board sort of just doing this on their own. That there should be some sort of, the review, the public input should guide the review process, less than, just staffers or whoever, or the board just taking it upon themselves to put together this review. But, I get the dynamic, but it just seems that there should be a connection that's clarified between the nature of that public input and the way in which that 10-year review is conducted.
Okay. Auditor Blaha.
So really, I kind of went back and forth, I think, 3 times during this discussion so far. But, one of the things I do like is the idea that we have a regular look, that the idea of being kind of reflective and that we are checking it every 10 years is part of our work. And maybe this also comes from somebody who, again, it oversees a bunch of audits that happen whether or not you have a complaint. You regularly check. It's just part of maintenance. It's just part of oversight. It's just part of a good practice. And then that we're not only relying on, if there is an issue, that you have a well-organized group that can come and bring it to to the look. Just the idea that, no, we're just going to take a look at everything every 10 years. That's just part of the work we do. It's part of our practice. I think there's a great value in that, the alternative is that unless you have a group of people that are organized enough to watch for this, nobody else is watching. And so, yeah, maybe the auditor in me is just saying, hey, I like the idea of a regular process where everybody just take a quick look. We're not assuming that there's a problem, but we always just take a look and do it relatively quickly when there aren't a lot of other issues, just to double check and then go forward.
Okay, thank you. These comments seem to suggest that the conditions for consideration of a modification or removal request would be the more concise guidelines for that regular periodic review, as opposed to the evaluation criteria, which is focused on specific issues, and a lot of specific issues: lifespan, restorative justice, values, complexity, approachability, accessibility, so that rather than the evaluation criteria, the conditions for consideration might be a more appropriate recommendation. Lindsay?
Yeah, now that I have a better understanding, I agree with Auditor Blaha and her comments about having that annual or the 10-year review. And for another reason, and that would be that if there were public outcries on any certain piece of art, that would be one object, one piece of art. And I think it's important that it gets evaluated as a whole at some point to see how it's balanced as a whole. I don't think anybody else would be doing that really, other than this group, the board. And then also it would be interesting, like you just mentioned, Chair Westerman, kind of flagging certain items that are on an endangered list, if you will. Some things to watch out for, kind of planting seeds that, hey, this one is having some deterioration in the future, kind of pointing out some problems before they are crumbling at your feet. So I think that, yeah, I'm excited about that part of it. And I also wanted to ask, weren't we going to also review the policies and the conditions every 10 years as well? Wasn't that part of this paperwork, the policies?
Oh, that's a good question. Jessica?
We definitely did discuss that in earlier meetings. I don't believe it made it into the final draft, but we could talk about adding it.
Okay, so in addition to a 10-year review of the works themselves, also a periodic or a 10-year review of policies? Jessica?
I mean, you know, Auditor Blaha has the auditor in her, and I have the lawyer in me that says that that is a good idea, because policies are also not edifices that should, you know, never ever change. And so I think that that is a way to make sure that not just the monuments, but also the policies themselves continue to evolve as we do.
Okay, thank you. Auditor Blaha?
Yes, I agree with Jessica. But also I think we need to kind of make sure that there's a little bit of an offset in there. If you have a set of conditions for review, you come up on 10 years and you just change them right before you review. I think that it's just an idea that you'd hope that they're a little bit staggered, so that you don't have this idea that you are simply changing your things for the moment and not having a longer look. So I don't think it has to be in here, but just a thought that they should that those reviews should be a little bit staggered.
Okay, so a staggering there. Is that something we want to include in the policy itself or in our report?
Oh, I'm thinking report, absolutely.
Okay. So in our report, we will suggest a regular review of the policies and the 10-year review of the monuments, and make sure that they are in a staggered timeline so that both don't occur at the same time or so closely that we're changing policy just before we're going to do a review or just after we do a review. And then, are there any particular conditions that we would want to review the policy itself? So we've got conditions here to consider modification or removal of the artworks. Do we want to also make recommendations on conditions for a policy review? Auditor Blaha, is your hand still up or you have a comment?
Nope, it is not still up.
Okay. Jessica.
I always appreciate having standards when you have the review so that you can decide, what is it that we're judging. I wonder if rather than making a new set of bullet points, if we ask the board to review the policy in light of, I can't recall what, the very top of the document where it talks about guiding principles or mission statement or something to that effect, just to ensure that it comports with that.
That the conditions for review?
Well, that the policy continues to comport with the values statement at the beginning.
Okay. All right. I think those will definitely make our draft policy more understandable, more directed. So I appreciate the comments here and the input. Anything else about this particular question here? All right. We'll move to, oh, yes, Peter.
Hello, this is Pete. Paul Mandel's on the line here via speaker, and he has a comment.
Okay.
Paul?
Yeah, with regards to the review of policies, they will, in addition, obviously every 10 years, but as if legislative laws are modified or changed, like at one point we had that all landscaping on the Capitol grounds must make every effort to use native planting. But that's just an example. So obviously if the legislature creates new laws, that too would have to be incorporated and might cause a adjustment to the policy in the interim or at the time of the 10 years, just like it has regularly on policies with regard to the Capitol building when they changed rooms to public spaces, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously the legislature changes laws or adds laws. policy would have to be modified to reflect that.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Okay. The next question that we have is about the possibility that there may be numerous applications to review with high processing costs. And should there be some kind of fee associated with engaging in this process? Some of our members feel that that's exclusionary to require a fee, but it was suggested that it might be a small application fee, like $25 to $50. So individuals have to think before submitting an application, or at least consider it more fully if there's an application fee. What's your feedback? Auditor Blaha?
Thank you. I'm a big fan of no fee. I'm thinking that I think the level of a fee that you would have to set to be a deterrent to something frivolous, I think would be so high that it would exclude things that were non-frivolous. And how, if you want to, I think to set it high enough to cover the costs would also be deterrent. So I think that the numbers just don't work out on a fee particularly well. Also, I think again in our office, we get requests for, we don't charge for, say, a request for an investigation, and just going through those does have a cost. But I think that it's, again, I can't think of a good fee setting. $25, that's really not going to necessarily deter anybody. Set it enough that it actually covers the fee, and you deter everybody. So I don't know if the economics of it, if the math of this will work out. So I think we'd have to have a good idea of an amount in mind before we'd want to say yes to this idea.
Thank you. Dr. Bean?
Yeah, I just would like to second what Auditor Blaha just said in terms of the fee. I don't really understand how even a minimal fee would sort of encourage people to think more. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. And if anything, it does just provide another barrier for people that is, even a small fee can be more of a barrier for one person than it can for another.
Okay, thank you. So we'll not include a small application fee if that's appropriate. Jason?
I'll go on record as supporting an application fee and a significant one at that. If you're going to take up state resources and times, that's one way we do that. We cover our costs in all sorts of other areas, whether it's a driver's license fee or an application fee, and in any number of things. So if you want to add a monument, or if you are offended by some current monument, then there should be at least some sort of non-trivial fee associated with the significant amount of staff time that we're recommending in this process that goes along with it. So it's, I have $250, $300, $500. I think that's completely reasonable, but that's just for the record and my perspective on it.
Okay, Peter, and then Lindsay.
Paul Mandel is on the line with a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, to Jason's point too, if there, a nominal fee is not going to, it's going to simply defray minor costs, but a full process. If you have the board holding a hearing, if we have to pay per diems for part of the process where we have to bring in technical people and we have to pay a per diem or travel, that could run up to, I could see it running up to $1,000. If that were the case, and that's probably worst case scenario, we would not be able to entertain more than, for instance, one application per year at best, if not over a biennium. We are that tight on budget right now. We don't know what the legislature is going to even give us in the way of inflation. But if we were running a cost of $1,000 an application, we could not handle more than one or maybe two per 2 years. To Jason's point, a $250 fee would still probably not cover costs, it might not cover costs if we got into several public hearings, et cetera, plus IT support, et cetera. But the fee will determine capacity as well as everything else. Thanks.
Okay. Lindsay.
So I'm thinking about this in practice, and I am in favor of no fee for various accessibility reasons that we talked about. I am, however, concerned about an onslaught of applications. If something, happens and all of a sudden all of these groups are applying, and maybe you have 10 applications for the same item, and you're required to respond within a certain amount of days to each one. It just doesn't quite make sense. And while I hate throwing in more hoops, but I'm wondering if there needs to be a hoop before you actually apply. I almost wonder if you have to have an invitation to apply through a conversation with somebody from the board so that you understand the logistics of how this works, what the costs are, what you would be responsible for, whether or not other groups have already applied for the same thing. Just some kind of barrier prior to the actual application that triggers all of this work on behalf of the state. And I'm thinking about just you have to set up a meeting with somebody to discuss, or some kind of pre-process.
Okay. Auditor Blaha and then Lieutenant Governor.
This is a really interesting discussion. This is one we get to have on a lot of things. So I absolutely appreciate everything I'm hearing. I think that if we are going to set some sort of fee, I think the fee has to be tied to something very specific. I don't think we can just set a fee to hope it's a deterrent, because then I think you end up getting you deter usually the wrong people. You're going to deter people without a lot of resources. So if it is to cover the cost, I think it has to be based on actual cost. And so if you say you need to be able to come up with the cost of this, then we've got to set it at that $1,000, $2,000. To set anything else would add a level of arbitrariness that will get will get unintended consequences. I know, for instance, in our office, we do get often more requests than we can actually process. And so we don't have a fee. What we end up having to do is simply doing as much as we can with what we have. And I think that it'd be better to put the pressure then back onto where the funding should come from, which should be that if this needs to be something where we need a better appropriation, that we actually do it that way, that we do it in a way that we're sharing the costs over the whole state instead of just an individual. So I think I'd rather see the idea of increasing appropriation than an individual fee. If we do an individual fee, I think it has to be based on the actual cost, not an arbitrary number. I think overall, it makes more sense for this to be done as part of the kind of the work of government, as opposed to an individual fee. Though, the underfunding of the board is legit and is an absolute real concern we're going to have if nothing else were to change and we go with no fee. I could see that we wouldn't be able to get through a backlog. So that's a very real problem.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to associate myself with the state auditor's comments as well as Dr. Bean's comments here. I think if it becomes overly burdensome, we can certainly revisit it, and we should. And Auditor Blaha, to your point, if this is about an issue of resources, perhaps we need to revisit appropriations to the CAP board itself, and that is an ongoing conversation and one that I'm eager to have. But I think state agencies and boards and the enterprise as a whole is there to respond to the needs of the public. And so, I think our goal, and one of the reasons that we put together both of these task forces, is to try to remove as many barriers as possible for public participation. So at this time, I would not support a fee, although I believe we could, should continue to monitor how these applications are coming in and what kind of response the CAP board itself could have.
Thank you. Jessica?
I also agree with the no fee approach. And I think to the extent that this will burden the department, that should be an appropriation. I wonder if that's something we could put in the report, and the recommendation is that we think that should happen. I also, to Lindsay's comments, and how does this actually work in person when you get 50 applications to take down one monument? That could be something as easy as a call afterward from the staff to the applicant to say, we actually already have 49 of these applications. And so do you guys want to maybe combine? There could be some discretion to have the public hearing about one monument from 10 applicants at once, so you could minimize some costs that way. But I also think it's important to consider, when we're asking fee or no fee, that there have been a lot of costs that were externalized earlier in this process. So there already has been a lot of staff time expended because someone decided to put the monument there. And we're not asking anyone to pay for that. And so there are some embedded inequities in then adding a fee now to have the board decide whether to keep it or not.
Thank you. So that idea of a follow-up call may support the earlier idea of an interim step there. We refer to it as a hoop, but there's also, as much as as much as I complain about how much time I spend in Zoom meetings, we could also take advantage of that technology to have online meetings at a smaller cost, if any. And that increases accessibility in some areas and then also limits it in others. Jessica.
And I would caution against calling, that call a hoop, because I don't think it's something the applicant has to do. I think it's just something that the staff can do depending on the situation. And I tend to expect that for the monuments that have the long and sustained opposition, you're going to get a coordinated effort anyway. And so you're probably not going to get 50 applications. But that essentially you put the onus on the staff, which I understand puts the onus on the staff. But they're the ones who know what's coming in, and they're the ones who can initiate that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Any other feedback? Okay. You've put forward a lot of good suggestions and issues for us to consider. So I think what we will do is include these suggestions in a draft, so that we can look at it again tomorrow before we have a vote about this. And do we also want to consider what might trigger a review or change to the policy when it becomes burdensome? What's the threshold for burdensome? But I think some of you have alluded to that already. 50 applications for a similar request being coordinated as a single request. That still requires the staff to review 50 applications, but not necessarily do 50 different or individual reviews. Any other comments? Questions? I really appreciate your engagement with this issue, especially since our goal is to make this process as open and as inclusive and as least burdensome as we can develop it. Okay. The next question or next topic here has to do with including a provision to involve the Minnesota State Legislature. And that's on page 11. There we go. After it makes a decision on the request, the CAP board will wait 3 weeks before implementing it. This will probably take us a little while to talk about, and we are at 11 o'clock. So let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and talk about this one. Okay. Okay. Are we ready to roll? Good to go, JC?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So we have 2 remaining items for this discussion on the policy. The first one for us to get through here is the involvement of the Minnesota Legislature on page 11. And there was no consensus on the responses or in the responses to the survey. So our 2 options here are to include bullet or item number 9, involvement of the Minnesota Legislature, or to not include it. And this involves if at least 2/3 of the membership of the Minnesota Senate and at least 2/3 of the membership of the Minnesota House of Representatives pass resolutions rejecting the CAP board decision, the CAP board will defer to the legislature and will not execute the original CAP board decision. Feedback? Auditor Blaha?
I just, maybe a process question. Let's say we don't include it, and they want it. If this were to leave this group, I mean, their legislative involvement can be added in kind of where? I just want a little bit more clarity on that, especially currently right now in the environment of the legislature has made it very clear, and I'm sure legislators here will back that up, that they want to be involved in stuff. So let's say we don't put it in there, can they just assert it without needing? Do they need us to do that or not?
That's a good question. Jessica, you have your hand up. Maybe you have an answer, or?
I do. The legislature, because it delegates its authority to the board, the legislature can always do what the legislature wants to do. So we don't have to put this in for it to be in their power. Instead, this would be it would be redundant of that, which is one of the reasons I prefer not to have it. What would happen in practice if this was not there and the legislature wanted to make a change is that it would have to be in session. That's one of its limitations. But then it's the same to how a bill becomes a law, right? Two houses, and then the governor passes it. What would be a little more complex is if the legislature wanted to override a gubernatorial veto. And that's, I think, where the 2/3 language of this came from, because then the legislature with 2/3 could override the governor's veto. And so this sort of shortcuts to that step. But for my money, in doing so, it adds an unnecessary hoop because the legislature already has that power.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion? So based on Auditor Blaha's and Jessica's input, they seem to be on the same plane here in terms of this is already part of the law. Jason.
So stipulating all of Jessica's points, I think the purpose of the provision in keeping the legislature involved, and I think it could use just a little bit of clarity about what happens when there's not a legislature in session. You'd have to postpone that to the execution of any decision until there is some sort of regular session or maybe even a special session. But the point being is that you're giving the opportunity for the legislature to act sort of in real time. Like, let's just say for the sake of something happens and you have a whole bill process and everything else. So if you're going to have a bill process, at what point does the CAP board stay a decision or stay in execution of an action? And so what you're doing is you're basically binding the CAP board not to act until the legislature has been given an opportunity and in a clear way through a resolution process to speak into a decision outside of the normal process that doesn't delay the execution of a particular decision, but creates a way in which binds the CAP board in its actions in a clear, specific way. Because, let's just say something happens and the CAP board makes a decision in June or July, legislature doesn't have the opportunity to meet again. Well, in what way is that execution of that decision stayed? So at least there's a process here. The legislature can always act as Jessica described, but you're actually creating a process to give the people through their elected officials a specific voice in that in a way that's administratively convenient as well. If they don't act within a three-week period, then they don't act, and then everyone wins because you can move forward with something. So I think there is a wisdom in creating an alternative mechanism that binds the board and then gives the opportunity for the legislature to act in a specific time that doesn't cause undue delay.
Okay. Okay. I thought someone was coming on the line there, so I was hesitating just a bit. Any other input for item 9? Peter?
The comment from Paul Mandel.
Thank you.
This is Paul. First of all, two things. What you are writing or rewriting and creating new is policy, which is forever non-binding on the legislature. The legislature, of course, as they have proven in this year's state government bonding bill, like state government bill, can interject themselves whenever they darn well please in any memorial. And in addition, on the implementation points within the policy of either modification and or removal, once you go through the whole process, assuming the committees meet, the research is done, the CAP board has ruled on a modification or a removal, if the applicant is not doing the fundraising to pay for such action, the legislature and the governor would have to be in support of such requests, because there is no money unless the legislature and the governor issue a bonding bill for that work. No one has the money to do removal or modification unless there's a request. So the legislature is automatically going to be involved if the applicant doesn't come up with the money to do that work. So in numerous ways, the legislature is already involved by the very fact that they created the CAP board. And 4 of them sit on the CAP board.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Any other feedback? The last one here within our topics is the idea of legacy as an evaluation criteria. And our concern here is how will the public understand the term legacy? And is there another term that might be more useful here? And that could be a question for Peter, possibly, to answer for us.
Sure, I'll take a shot at. I would be fine with turning that into another term, possibly. This is Peter Musty, planner at the CAP Board. Thanks for asking, Chair. The compatibility was a term used in another part of the, and I think that's possibly a better term and more pointed to the meaning of the point. But we may already have it covered in other criteria.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other observations? So in this case, we could replace legacy with compatibility, and then it's consistent with the rest of the document. And previously we had taken out the public philosophy of civic republicanism. And then we had used that term earlier in the document and deleted it in a previous draft. Jessica.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the switch to compatibility. I think that is more consistent with the ideas that we're seeing throughout the rest of the document. I think it would also make sense to switch the definition more towards that, which in the other parts of the document, it's talking more about how the monuments look and feel together with the Capitol, sort of the idea that Lindsay was talking about earlier of viewing it all as a whole. The reason I would move away from the definition that's there, you can see in my comment that I don't know that, I don't think everyone would agree that civic republicanism is imbued in all of the monuments, separate from the Capitol. But as a matter of just linguistic accessibility, I'd like to make sure that the policy is accessible. And I think switching that definition to something a little less poli-sci major and more more all of the rest of us makes sense.
And just a reminder, what we were talking about is that definition of civic republicanism. It's not related in any way to political party, but more along the lines of the interconnection between individual freedom and civic participation. That civic, so I'll read the definition for you. Civic republicanism stresses the interconnection of individual freedom and civic participation with the promotion of common good. And our goal has been to make sure that the language that we use is readily understandable by the people of the state of Minnesota. And in this case, I have to look up the definition every time I think about it. And the suggestion is to make this definition consistent with the previous definition of compatibility. Okay. That gets us through all of the questions in the document. So we've got time now to talk about the application forms and the FAQ document, if you're ready to go through that. And we'll consolidate all of the comments here and the suggested revisions and send out another draft for you to look at before our meeting tomorrow. Okay. So what we want to do now is, oh yes, Peter Musty.
Before we leave the policy discussion, Paul has one comment.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the question of implementation of modification decisions or removal, I think it needs, for the sake of transparency, it needs to be very clear that the CAP board deciding one way or the other does not make it happen, that the budget referred to under Commemorative Artwork Review Report, somebody is going to have to pay for it, and that needs to be at least noted that the CAP board's decision does not make it happen. If it's the state, like I said, that would have to go through a bonding request. If it's the applicant, obviously there's fundraising. If it's a combination of both, obviously there's both. But it should be understood that simply because the CAP board votes to remove something or modify something does not supply the wherewithal to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So the process itself includes the CAP board decision, but that doesn't mean that the project goes through. There has to be funding associated with it, whether that funding comes from the legislature and the people of the state of Minnesota, or if it comes through an individual or a group fundraising effort to support the addition or modification or removal of any of the Capitol ground artwork. Thank you, Paul. That's really helpful. All right. We'll take a look at the forms now. And see if there are any additional changes. So what we accomplished since our last meeting was to add descriptions for how the addition proposal meets each of the conditions of consideration for an addition request, and for how the modification and removal requests meet one or more of those considerations, conditions for considerations. We also removed the estimated cost provision in all of the request forms. And the CAP board staff indicated that they would work with applicants to determine this estimated cost and don't want cost to be a barrier for applying. And then we also included some examples of fundraising methods in the FAQ document. Jessica.
To Paul's last comment, I wonder if it would be helpful to maybe do a check the box here that says, I understand that to implement a addition or a modification, the CAP board needs to approve it, and I need to raise commensurate funds or something to that effect, so that there is within the process itself an acknowledgement.
Okay. All right, so to add a checkbox. That addresses issues of funding. Thank you. There. Thank you, JC. All right. These forms will be available online and also in a print version by phoning or emailing the CAP board for a print version of the forms. So what we want to take into consideration here is whether the changes that we've made make the application process more accessible. And are there any other questions that might need to be included in a frequently asked questions document? Oh, I was trying to scroll. Thank you, JC. Okay, why don't you go ahead and pull up the frequently asked questions now. Oh. There we go. Okay. Is there assistance available during the process? How does an applicant start the process? What information is needed in the application? What criteria does the CAP board use to approve requests? How long is this going to take? What's the timeline? And we have some good graphics there to give somebody an idea of how long this process takes. For both addition, modification, relocation, removal. And then how might this be funded? How much might it cost? How can it be funded? And then there are some examples. How does the CAP board decide on a site? How are applicants involved? And are there certain things that are prohibited? Jessica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this might be another place where we could put just another touch point for Paul and his comment of, well, not the touch points for Paul, but to address Paul's comment that maybe after paragraph 4 and before 5, we could say, you know, what else do I need to do besides get the CAT board approval or something to that effect? So in case someone only picks up this document, they will still see that it's the 2-part process.
Okay. Good suggestion. Thank you. Reinforcing that idea that just because the CAT board approves a request doesn't mean that it happens tomorrow. That funding for the project, either through the state legislature or through individual or group fundraising, thank you. Good point. Anything else about the frequently asked questions? Perhaps questions people have asked you, if they know you're on our committee, our task force, or questions we've seen in public forums or venues that might not be covered by our frequently asked questions here. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So we'll make those adjustments to the FAQs. All right, we are at 11:40, 11:41. Is there anything else that you would like to address while we've got a few minutes here at the end of this process that you want to share or didn't get a chance to include previously? This is where the teacher in me says, okay, I'm going to start calling on people. Don't look away. Okay. We will include these suggestions for revision and make sure that you have a copy to review before our meeting tomorrow. Peter Musty has his hand up.
Again, raising my hand for Paul Mandel.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your report itself, toward the end of your report under public engagement, it talks about the documents being made available in multiple languages online and ADA accessible. We would welcome any and every recommendation on how that could be accomplished either financially and or with assistance from other bodies that currently do that. I know sometimes that, I know from like ADA accessible and for instance, I'm used to sign language, incorporating sign language into or signing into meetings. Any of that work can involve a hefty expense, but if anyone has any any resources to convert for languages and CD accessibility, that would be much appreciated by the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll add that consideration. And we'll add that consideration into our discussion of the report itself tomorrow. Do we go with the top 5 languages spoken in the state of Minnesota as readily available? So think about that and come back with some suggestions on how we might accomplish it to make sure that these documents are available as widely as possible. Okay. All right. I want to thank you all for your careful attention to detail and your eye for omissions and places where we can improve these documents so that the most people can access them as possible, and that this process be as inclusive as possible. It's not easy work, but I really appreciate everything that you've done to help us get this far. Does anybody have anything else they want to comment on or include? Paul? Just kidding. One of the things that I appreciate that we have been able to accomplish this work over Zoom and email and shared documents. But what I really miss about these kinds of meetings is just being in a room together where we can all see each other and say hello. And there's just no way to replace that kind of camaraderie on a project like this. But we've done a pretty good job. So for tomorrow, we will be going through the report itself and taking a look at some of the questions and comments that we want to make sure we address. We will have another opportunity to provide input along the way. So we'll do our closing exercise. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order and share with us something beautiful that you have seen today. And I can tell all the visual thinkers to look up. And I watch for the birds to come. As soon as geese start coming this way, I have a tally of everybody that shows up and that I'm expecting to see. And so this morning there were orioles and rose-breasted grosbeaks at my bird feeder in the back. And that just made me really happy. My next big indicator that it's a beautiful day is when the hummingbirds return, but that's still a little ways away. All right. Daniel, we'll let you go first.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. Looked out the window and saw the beautiful sun. It may be a while till I get out there, so kind of worked in opposite, got me a little bit depressed. And the second thing, if you'll allow me, is what I saw was beautiful was on my computer screen. and that is that folks continue to make sure that making this process and language and everything associated is accessible to all residents in Minnesota. And so that warmed my heart, even if the sun can't yet.
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
Well, mine's a bird one as well. Last year, we had a Cooper's hawk's nest right outside on the in the tree, and they've been scouting around and look like they're going to come back. They are beautiful birds. I have to admit, some of the things they leave in the yard aren't very beautiful, but I did enjoy seeing them.
Jessica.
Well, mine's super easy because I'm on this trip with my parents to Lake Gitchigami. So just waking up and looking out the window, we get to see the sun hit it, and it looks like diamonds every morning. It's gorgeous.
Well, you should turn so we can all see.
I keep trying. That's not right.
Thank you. Lindsay.
All right, so today I'm going to share these sprouts. So these are sunflowers that are hopefully going to be about 10 feet tall. And I love how the seeds are just sitting ready to be busted off the, the little sprout. So these are inside now because the bunnies and the squirrels are awful. Well, they're cute, but they would not let these grow if I had them outside, and the birds. So they're starting inside, and I just love to see them coming out. Like, oh, nature, it really works. You know, always surprises me. But
It's always a pleasant surprise. Auditor Blaha.
Today, I noticed that my excuse me, my lilacs are starting to color up. And if you lived in central Minnesota, you know that last year was a really bad year for lilacs. We had a terrible fungus go through, and most of us thought we lost them entirely. But not only did we not lose them, they're actually producing flowers this year too. So I think there's some great hope in that.
Definitely. Dr. Bean.
Let's see. Today I have this beautiful dinosaur that my my nephew's son dropped off for me yesterday for Mother's Day, and it's a cactus. And apparently it took him over an hour to pick it out at the store, and I have it here on my desk, and it is giving me life today.
Important decisions sometimes take time. Jason. Oh, did we lose Jason? I think we did. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. That's a great way to end a meeting with plants and birds and sunshine. So we will see you tomorrow afternoon, and